I definitely playing the Infocom games. I definitely knew that that was the epitome of a text adventure. That was it was written by people who knew how to write. They knew how to design a game. It wasn't kind of thrown together, cobbled together. It was very professionally done. So I knew that every time an Infocom game came out, it was going to be extremely high quality. I know it was going to get probably the same presentation, the same kind of um, you know the scoring system and the way the text was on the screen and everything. I knew I was going to get that, but what was in it was very different. Every time, and I played a lot of the Infocom adventures, and I didn't. I only finished maybe 5 of them, something like that. I finished Zork 2. I finished Wishbringer, which I loved Wishbringer. And surprisingly, I finished Spellbreaker, which is an expert level 1, without any help. That was just plugging away, but that was a really great game. I think I finished Sorcerer, and
What gave you the opportunity to work with Infocom?
um, when I started working with Infocom, I had just left a startup of mine called Inside Out Software, and wait a minute. I actually here we go. When I started working with Infocom, I was at a startup of mine called Inside Out Software, which was located in Londonderry, New Hampshire, and at Inside Out, we were doing a lot of different ports of games. The biggest one being the Might and Magic 2 titles that we done on the Commodore and on the IBM, and think the Amiga as well. And we started to, we wanted to do some original contracts, and we wanted to do some original games, and so we were looking for some possible development contracts. And so myself and my co-founder John Fascini had John had some contacts at Infocom, so we went down to Cambridge and to the Infocom offices, and we talked to them about possible projects that we could work on. And it was interesting. The projects, we actually worked on 2 projects at once for Infocom at the very beginning. One of them was called TimeSync, which was a game that Brian Moriarty was working on, but then he decided to leave Infocom and go work on Loom at LucasArts. This was in 1980, I think it's 88. And so we took on TimeSync to do it was being developed on Mac, it was being developed on Mac. We were putting it on the PC. Our job was to actually redevelop the game on the PC. PC market was starting to really take off. And then, surprisingly, the other project that we were working on was a version of the movie Aliens. We were doing Aliens on the PC. And so we started on that project and continued going down the road. And we had hired other people to develop these projects, and then when Epix canceled the project that I was working on, to me that was like, they canceled everything on the Apple II at that time, and I saw the end of the 8-bit Apple II era. That was it. It was over, and I decided that rather than stay at Inside Out and kind of make the burden a little bit harder for everybody there, because we didn't have any other upcoming contracts, that I decided that I needed to just fully jump into the PC development industry immediately and not try and kind of figure it out slowly. I needed to just jump into it. So I left Inside Out, and one of the people that I had hired at Inside Out, a friend of mine, we both had left Inside Out, and then we formed a little company together called Inside Out, or called Ideas from the Deep. And because we'd already been talking to Infocom, we went back and talked to Infocom some more, and in talking to Infocom another time, Lane and I, his name is Lane Roth, Lane and I got a contract to do the operating system on the Apple II for the latest of Infocom's 4 adventures that they were making, which was Arthur, Journey, Shogun, and Zork Zero. And so we did the Apple II operating system, which needed to be very small, needed to fit in 4K of RAM, and so Lane and I both split up part of the operation of both the writing of that code, and we did it. It was pretty quick. It was under a month.
So it was that one piece that ended up getting used across it. So that was your main interaction. Now,
other than the other 2 games. Other than the other 2 games, which probably never came out. I don't think they ever came out.
Right, because we have all the internal Infocom assets.
Nice.
Somebody gave it to me.
That is awesome.
And one of the things we found was a fully finished game of The Abyss.
Right.
I mean, you sound pro them.
Hell yeah! Oh yeah, they're awesome.
So that's easy. But
yeah, it was interesting if you look back on. Or when I look back on the text adventure era, they definitely went through a definite interesting phase. I think that text adventures created adventures. The success of Sierra and all the other games companies back then that had adventure games, those came from the text adventure era. So a lot of people owe everything to text adventures. In fact, today, if you look at companies that are creating, say, the Sam and Max adventures, Telltale Games, they create a lot of titles. That's all part of the whole evolution of where text adventure started. And I played so many of those things back then, back from the full text adventure. That's all you got. Eamon adventures even, which were all text, and then movement towards graphical adventures. Where you had 4 lines of text, and then you had the graphics up there, and then Sierra's kind of interesting hybrid with King's Quest, where you kind of have some text and use a joystick to control the guy on the screen, and Trillium/Telerium, where they did Amazon and Fahrenheit 451 Rendezvous with Rama, where they had this cool hybrid of graphical adventure with text, and then there were action scenes that were like replaying those parts of the books. Shifted into a arcade on the screen kind of action. Very interesting to see that whole evolution. But when you look back at it, I still got way more satisfaction out of Infocom's games than any other of the games, because of the writing, because of the depth of those games. Your imagination is so much more than what you can put on a screen, and that was definitely a golden age, and that was the 80s, and then the 90s was real. Computers have horsepower, and we shift into graphics, full graphics mode, and no text, and that was a big change, and I still think that there's definitely a place. There's definitely a place for that kind of writing somewhere, I think a lot of it is just the writing of how some of the later games like BioShock, just writing those games. You don't actually see the text, but you kind of feel the text. Where we're trying to create these interactive environments that are highly action-oriented, but also have a sense of depth, which is all based off of writers really writing these things. So I don't think it's totally gone away, but it definitely did have its time.
Okay. All right. I think.
Hell yeah, he's gonna ruin the call. The first time I encountered a text adventure, it was 1979, and I was at Sierra College in Rockland, California, and a friend of mine, I was basically addicted to arcade games back then, and a friend of mine had just come back from Sierra College going nuts, saying, "Oh my God, there's games up at the college and they're free." And when you're a little kid, 11 years old, 25 cents, that was, that was a lot of money actually back then. So I jumped on my bike. We all rode back up to the college, and when we went in there, we saw all these terminals connected to an HP 9000 mainframe in the next room, and a bunch of college students, and they're all on the computers, and some of them they were playing games, and I remember seeing Poison Cookie on one, and Hunt the Wumpus on another one, and then the one computer in the corner that everybody was crowded around was running this text adventure, which was Adventure, Colossal Cave Adventure. And that one was really interesting because that looked like a real game, and because of that, when I started learning programming right after that, the first type of game that I made was a text adventure because of Adventure.
What was that text adventure?
It was a dungeon. The theme of the text adventure was it was like a dungeon crawl. There was a bunch of rooms, and I was basically just trying to be able to move between rooms, just learning how to use variables and print stuff to the screen and have some kind of program flow. And it was not the adventure did not get very long because I was having to put them on punch cards because I didn't have an account, so I had to save them on something, paper tape or punch cards, and I was doing them on punch cards. And after I had about, I think it was like 300 cards, which is like there's a line of basic per card, I was going home one day and the cards all fell off the back of my bike into a bunch of water, and I was like, done. I'm not using cards anymore. I'm going to wait for discs because I knew that the Apple II was about to get a disk drive. I never actually got much time on Adventure because it was locked to one guy's account somehow. Like, he had the permissions on his timeshare account. So Saturdays at 7 in the morning was when everybody came up to the college to watch this guy play Adventure. So that was where I basically got my exposure, was watching somebody else play it. I wasn't able to actually play it myself for a while until came out on the Apple II when Microsoft published the Apple II version.
So, Scott Adams games?
Yes, played Scott Adams games. Those were I played Scott Adams games before I played Infocom games. Scott Adams games were 20 sector binary programs, and they were the text descriptions were not very long, but it was really nice. I mean, I'd played other adventures on the Apple II after Scott Adams, and they didn't have the same quality, mostly because most of them were not written in assembly language like Scott's were. A lot of them were just written in BASIC. But Pirate's Adventure was the first non-mainframe text adventure that I started playing, and I believe I totally finished that one.
Yeah, those were a little easier to solve.
Yeah, those were easier adventures to solve. I played a lot of Scott Adams games. I never did play the Savage Island ones, but I did play a lot of those. I played a lot of the early Sierra games like Wizard and the Princess. I think it was Mission Asteroid, Cranston Manor. Trying to remember how many of those high-res adventures they did.
Well, they did Time Zone.
Time Zone. I didn't play Time Zone. That was a lot of discs. 12 sides.
Time Zone is the Phantasma
one there.
Were there any that were a favorite?
I think Wishbringer was probably my favorite one. It was a really easy one. But what was interesting was, I love the way that when you go into the witch's magic shop kind of thing at the end of town and you come back out, the entire world is changed. And I like that game so much that the map that came with it that you fold out and everything, I actually drew a copy of that whole map. So I could write on it. I didn't want to mess up the original map, so I actually just kind of redrew the whole thing. And then made a bunch of copies so I could just, if I had to write on it, I could write on it. And it was interesting. It was interesting. I love that game. It was really fun.
What?
Yeah, not really.
No, that's what I mean.
It was almost anti. It was the opposite of where when creating a game like Doom, the focus is entirely, we were making a game that was supposed to kind of rely on base instinct, and the UI disappears, and there's just no thought. It's just pure reaction, and that is very much the opposite of what text adventure is, which is very, sit there and you think and you puzzle over stuff. You try and figure out where things are, keep track of what you have. All these, very very heavy thought process on a text adventure. And when we created Doom many years later, it was really completely opposite kind of play style, which is great. Something that the fact that you can do that on a computer was very interesting. You can have a really intense interaction on a computer in multiple different ways. One where you're trying to be very thoughtful and just stare at the screen and look at the letters and try and understand what they mean and try and pull some other meaning out of those sentences, and then have another intense experience where you're just high on adrenaline, fear, running, shooting. Totally different thing. It's funny when we were designing, when we were designing Doom, and coming up with switches and key cards and puzzles and stuff, we were not thinking back to other kinds of games that we'd played, like, oh, we need to copy this kind of thing. I mean, it was kind of an evolution of what we'd been doing. If you go back before that, when we created the Commander Keen series of games, they were totally inspired by Mario. They were Mario clones almost, but they were more involved than Mario, because Mario was a game that kind of pushed you through it. It was constantly scrolling, and you had to keep up with it. And when we did our Commander Keen games, we had the scrolling, but we didn't have the pushing you through. And so because we weren't pushing you through, we were able to actually put puzzles in there, like pick up a gem here, put it in a gem holder, open a door, find a card, put it in the door. So we actually developed that, puzzly get through the door paradigm back in our Commander Keen days. And then when we moved up to Doom, it was just natural to use those same kind of puzzles, but in 3D, and it worked out when we put them in there. It actually, the game felt right. It felt like, this is interesting. It makes people fully explore the environment, not just rush through and not see everything. Hey, let's hide some stuff, make them look for it. So that was a good thing, but it wasn't the Commander Keen era when we had put those puzzles in there to open doors. It was I don't think it wasn't harkening back to text adventures, because text adventures actually had much deeper puzzles than just find a card and open a door kind of thing. There was a lot more to those.
So, and a couple of the others are doing work. I don't know if you met any of them.
I didn't get to meet any of them. In fact, I think Steve Maretsky was in the office when I was up there talking to them. I've been up there a couple times, and I think that he was up there probably each time that I was there, but I never did ask to see, hey, are any of the implementers around? So unfortunately I didn't get to meet him back then.
So, is there anything that you remember that did you have a producer, or did you have...
Nope, not on when we were writing the writing the info DOS, we called it. There was no producer on that because it happened so fast. I mean, we knew what we were doing. We'd written this kind of stuff before for years. So the development of that OS went really quick, and we actually, when we wrote it, we didn't know what it was going to be used for, but we knew that they needed it. They said, we need this operating system. We got some more games coming. They use up more memory than the older games, and we want to actually have an operating system that we can use like ProDOS that is has file names, and it has setting prefixes and using multiple volumes on the Apple II, etc. Not a hard-coded, what you call an RWTS, function, which is just reading tracks and sectors. So they wanted something that was much easier to program and in smaller memory. So it was very easiest for us to write this, and so we did not know what it was going to be used on, so we had no idea that was.
Or is your not even your
You mean for InfoDOS?
Well, yeah, and any of the Infocom products. Did you end up with a name on it?
I don't know. I don't know if they actually did that, but if you boot up any of those 4 games, you hold down both Apple keys, our credits come up. It's a little Easter egg. In fact, I have a photo on my photo sites, and there's also, if you do a search for InfoDOS, you'll find a whole thing on just that whole Easter egg. There's someone took a screenshot of the Easter egg thing, but I actually have disk images of those games. You can do the same thing. Hold down both Alt keys on the PC, and it'll pop up.